All right. And again, if you are just joining us, thank you for attending the Project Unicorn Interoperability Certification, Your Market Advantage Part 1 to the two-part series. Please chat in your name, your organization, where you're joining us from, and we are going to get started. So a quick agenda for today. We're going to do some introductions in just a moment and do an overview of Project Unicorn. Then we're going to talk a little bit about data interoperability in education and its importance. Then specifically get into the Project Unicorn Interoperability Certification, having a panel discussion with our awesome panelists today, and then a Q&A, and we'll do next steps and a thank you after that. So I'm going to hand it over to our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and we'll start with Josh.
Josh Shepard, excited to be here and share our journey on interoperability, President and COO at Simple EDU, and a former K-12 Chief Technology Officer.
Great. And Paul?
Hello, Paul Mallon. I'm a product manager at Formative. Super excited to be here too, just to highlight interoperability and the future of edtech with it.
Perfect. And Dan?
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Carroll, co-founder and chief product officer of Clever. Like Josh, I have my roots in the classroom and in the IT office, but my skills are more rusty than his.
Thanks. And we will hear from our panelists in just a few moments. But before we do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Project Unicorn. And I'm Chloe Sanducci, the project manager for Project Unicorn at Innovate EDU. And to go over a little bit about Project Unicorn, if you don't know what it is, it's an initiative of Innovate EDU, and it's made up of a coalition of national education organizations that collaborate to promote and support the use of data interoperability standards in K-12. It's funded by the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what we do here is we provide resources and support for vendors, school systems, and states, specifically referring to data interoperability. And to define interoperability, what that is the seamless, secure, and controlled exchange of data between applications. So interoperability can transform teaching and learning by giving teachers the information they need to succeed and enable innovation in classroom practices to help guide students. So let's first look at this from a school perspective of why data interoperability is important. So districts and states, they're swimming in data that they can't really use because we have siloed data. We have the difficulty to bring data from different sources together. Often it's not validated data and it can lead to inaccuracies. And there's some challenges that are caused by this lack of interoperability. So we have a lot of time being spent manually entering data, manually downloading, manipulating spreadsheets. The inability to see data from multiple sources in one place or assessments in one place. We have students leaving LMSs, going to external websites to view the content, and just being moved in an unsecure and unprotected manner. So all these education pain points will ultimately affect you, the vendor's bottom line, your sales, your renewals, your usability, etc. And this is why there's a case to invest your product into getting certified. Aligning to data standards early in the product development cycle demonstrates visionary leadership and product maturity to customers and investors, and can often reduce future technical debt. And it also signals your commitment to helping educators and administrators make the most of their data and positions your company as a market leader. So a couple different stats here. A Digital Promise survey found that more than 65% of districts identified a lack of data interoperability as a widespread problem. And in COSIN's 2022 Back to School survey, IT leaders identified data interoperability as one of their top 3 technology challenges. So this is really important as we continue to move forward, that this is a top of mind thing for districts right now. And as a result, school systems and states are increasingly including interoperability requirements in their RFPs, and more vendors are enabling standards-aligned connections with their applications. So the Project Unicorn rubric and certification In an effort to create a shared language for school districts, stakeholders, and states and vendors through a comprehensive engagement project, Project Unicorn developed a rubric to evaluate tools about the key aspects of interoperability. This rubric is meant to be a living document that allows stakeholders to evaluate where their efforts and tools are on the journey towards interoperability. And it's also used to evaluate vendors and implement language from the rubric into RFPs. So what we'll do in just a moment is chat the rubric in so that you can take a look at it. We are not going to go line by line of the rubric, but you can kind of see an idea of the things that are assessed on the rubric. And there's a lot of ways to be interoperable and standards that can help, but what really matters to consumers is the end result and how you handle their data. So no matter what standard you follow, the Project Unicorn certification will help you stand out in a crowd and recognize your commitment to interoperability, regardless of what standard you use. Because we say here that the Project Unicorn certification, it's standards neutral and Project Unicorn in general. And right here on this slide, you can see that we listed 4 of the major open education data standards organizations in the US, CEDS, A4L, edtech, and edfi. And if you're thinking right now, which standard should you integrate with if you're not integrated with one of them right now? Well, that depends. It depends on what your product does and the type of data that's being exchanged. And if you're looking for more of a 101 answer or thinking of which of these standards should you align with or integrate with, we actually did a webinar a few weeks ago that's on our YouTube channel where you can see the Interoperability 101 for vendors. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the rubric, and this is past the Interoperability 101. This is for vendors who are looking now to get certified and see where they sit on this rubric. So the rubric is the only source that helps schools and districts really see how an edtech tool measures against their key concerns and criteria like security, privacy, and so on. So with the Project Unicorn certification, we can help facilitate this conversation for both the buyer and the seller. And again, I believe it's already been chatted in, but if not, we're going to chat in the rubric for you to kind of look at this and see this in a closer way. But we will get into different aspects of the certification. So the Project Unicorn Interoperability certification signals that an edtech product prioritizes data interoperability. The interoperability certification enables school systems to know that they're investing in a product that also prioritizes interoperability. And interoperability tools operate with a product data dictionary, model, and infrastructure implementation that align with data standards in K-12 education, like edfi, A4L, edtech, CEDS, etc. So what does it mean to be certified for data standards? We have the Project Unicorn Standards Glossary, and this is a directory of the different standards in K-12 that make data interoperability possible. The glossary provides an overview of different standards by identifying the type of standard it is, along with the organization that built the standard, the domain and use case it covers, and a description of what the standard is able to do in terms of interoperability. Application submissions that align to standards are more trusted by school districts that are looking to implement data interoperability within their environment. And earning the certification that is provided by one of these data standards signals to consumers that a product is truly interoperable. Certification gives buyers the confidence that their educational data will flow seamlessly and securely between the different learning tools and applications in their ecosystems. So about the process of the certification. This certification offers a nuanced tiered signal to consumers, and applications will be ranked on their level of interoperability on a scale from 1 to 4, based on their level of interoperability as per the rubric. So the rankings from 1 to 4, each question will be scored on this scale based on the response and artifacts or evidence provided. So we ask for different types of artifacts, and we'll talk in just a moment about the types of artifacts or evidence that we will accept. The total score will determine the product certification tier as an application has earned, and each submission will receive an open badge based on the final ranking. And a product that earns a badge 4 provides evidence of interoperability through high data quality and granularity, seamless real-time or near real-time import and export process, standardized data format, and data protections via authorization, access, and proper encryption. You'll also see on the bottom of the slide that your badge will be featured on the EdSurge product index and the Learn platform. And we will talk more about this at our next webinar, the part 2 to this series. But just know that the badge will be featured on those 2 platforms. So this slide shows you what these badges look like, the digital badges, and some of the value of the certification. So here's some of the uses for marketing and visibility of the badges. So just as I said on the previous slide, the visibility on the indexes. We also put you on to our website so that the districts who sign our pledge for the school network pledge, they will also see that you're a certified vendor, and we have about 800 districts that have signed our pledge. You will be featured in a press release, as well as an invitation to be invited to webinars. And we also have a roadmap for additional marketing materials. And just a couple FAQs, so some frequently asked questions about the process before we get into our panel. And before I go through the FAQs, I do want to note that we have a Q&A box. Feel free to either put it into the chat or better put it into the Q&A box if you have any questions about the certification, any questions specifically for our panelists. We will do a Q&A after some pre-written questions. So for the certification process, FAQs, what is the cost? There's no cost. It is completely free to apply and to become certified or receive a badge for the Project Unicorn Interoperability certification. A question that we get quite often is, what is the time investment for this certification? It's very little for most of the vendors, and our panelists can speak to this, but sometimes vendors, it might take less than 30 minutes. It depends on how prepared you are with the evidence and the artifacts, but in general, it's very, very little time. And this is compared often, the word certification that we use here, we have vendors comparing that to certifications for the standards. It is a very, very different process, and very little time is needed for this specific certification. For evidence and artifacts, so you can get creative. We sometimes have people show us evidence through information on their public site. They sometimes send us screenshots, other times a video screencast, or you can actually meet with the Project Unicorn team to show us what you're trying to show us as evidence. However you think that you can get that information across, we are open to hear your creative ideas, but there's nothing set in stone of the way that you have to prove and show the evidence, aside from making sure that you're actually showing the evidence and the artifacts. And lastly, we get questions often on the scoring, thinking of if you need every single point in order to receive the highest rating. And the answer is no, because this is a tiered system and there's a range. So you don't need every single point in order to still receive a 4. And also, this is a feedback loop. So the Project Unicorn will give you feedback if you decide that you don't know exactly if you want us to go ahead and share your score with the indexes or with the platforms, and you want more feedback on how you can get a higher score, we're more than happy to do that. And you can reapply and resubmit your certification application. So again, this is a feedback loop. We are happy to talk with you about, what can be different in your application and how you can score higher. All right, so that is the basic information on the certification process, and it was probably already put into the chat. It was one of the last things put into the chat, but take that site, take our certification site, take a look at it. If you're interested or you want more information, reach out to us to ask any questions. But we're now going to move to our panel discussion, and all of our panelists are certified vendors. And they went through this process. So we're going to ask them some questions based around that. And if you have any questions, again, feel free to chat them in as we go. All right. So the first question that we are going to start with, I'm going to start with Dan, and I'll go to each of the panelists. So the first question is, why is the Project Unicorn interoperability certification important?
It's a great question, Chloe. So I think probably all of us know why interoperability is important, but the thing that comes to mind for me is when I was a tech director or a teacher, typing things manually into a system that already existed in another system, shuffling Excel files and editing them. We know how overworked administrators and teachers are, and anytime interoperability doesn't work, the burden gets put on them to do things, and we need that's not fair and that's not appropriate. So that's why interoperability is so important. When I think about the certificate, it's really hard as a school district purchaser or a principal making a purchasing software to know how that product works in an interoperable way. Some companies, proudly talk about interoperability on their sales materials or in their support pages, but many don't. And, it's probably not the number one headline selling point when you're thinking about a new reading intervention software or a new way to teach math. So the certification is a great way to get interoperability information in one place. And I really think it's a win for vendors who have made big investments in interoperability. The certification shows their customers and potential customers, if you go with us, you're going to have a great experience and you won't have those, painful manual processes that we all hate.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And Paul or Josh, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, not to repeat anything, but I think just providing customers that flexibility, right? Like to be able to choose the different products, to be able to interchange that data. Like one of the reasons we use Common Standards Project is so that folks can have a little bit of flexibility in their standards protocol rather than having to use a single system. So I think all of that aligns to just like flexibility for our customers. And that's a good signal to them that, hey, we're open to, working with you in your journey to solving problems, right? So that's one of the big reasons why we got certified.
Yeah, and I would also just add a source of trust, right? So Project Unicorn is an organization that's working with a number of different organizations that, our end goal is just to improve the technical landscape of tech and education, right? And so bringing the certification into play just serves as a source of trust between your company and what the industry is expecting.
Thanks. And Josh, I'm going to stick with you and ask the next question. So the next question is, why did you decide to get certified with Project Unicorn?
Yeah, so when we looked at kind of what our expectations are for our organization, coming specifically from a K-12 background, I have horror stories about interoperability and things that vendors, promise to us we go into that implementation process or into those technical conversations and just discover that, maybe there were misunderstandings, things weren't clearly documented. And so from coming from that K-12 background, that became very important just to be transparent and increase that communication with the clients and the districts that we were looking to serve. We talk a lot about standards and we have companies who are one roster-ish and and kind of working through that process. And so I think just for our company, it really was that source of trust and building that relationship amongst, our company, the industry, and with districts, as we just kind of focused on data privacy, data interoperability, and like Dan said, taking that burden off district and school administrators and teachers, right? They have enough going on. So when we kind of evaluated that, it made sense to have a third party come in and validate, our passion for interoperability, so that when school districts came to look at our product, right, it wasn't just us going, hey, we promise we work in the sandbox nice with other people, but another industry and another partner could come in and really validate that for us.
Thanks, Josh. And Paul, anything to add to that? Or same question, why did you decide to get certified with Project Unicorn?
Yeah, I think a lot of similar reasons to what Josh mentioned, but like one of them is just like, how do we fare, right? Like I think it's an interesting question to ask, like how do we fare in interoperability? And so running through the rubric and having a sense of pride and like, hey, we're pretty good, we're doing pretty well, and then being able to show that to districts is pretty nice to let us stand out amongst the thousands of products that are out there. And, going back to, a district leader being able to trust a salesperson at their word, rather than being able to say, hey, they got their certification, they did their homework. That's a big thing for us going into a conversation. It makes our product stand out amongst the other ones.
Great. And Dan?
Yeah. Clever is an interesting product. Interoperability is kind of what we do. It's kind of our business. So I think, of course, we wanted to, demonstrate that we're great adopters of open standards and all that. But I think for us, it's also just a belief that in the ecosystem and a belief in the mission of Project Unicorn, a hope that more districts will review the certifications before making purchases, and I hope that more vendors will go and complete the certification.
Great. And I'm going to go to Josh again for this next question. So Josh, how is the Project Unicorn certification important and useful for school districts?
Yeah, so I think it's just a benchmark for what a district leader should be looking for when they're looking at bringing another technical program into their ecosystem. There's so many programs. I think many times we don't realize the vast majority of programs that districts are dealing with. We think instructional tools, but there's so many other tools when I go back to my time in K-12 CTO. And so, just really looking at what is interoperability and what does that mean, and how can we speak the same language? Because from a school district coming to support that and look into that, a CSV being imported once a day is very different than a real-time API integration when you're talking in terms of instructional value. And so I think as a district leader, when you're coming to this and looking at the certification, it's a way for you to see that these potential partners are truly dedicated to ensuring that they are helping you with the goals that you have set forth for your organization. One of the things that we talked a lot about is a kid can't wait 24 to 48 hours to be imported into a system, right? And today's ecosystem of what teachers and administrators are dealing with, when a kid shows up at 8 a.m. To enroll into the math class, 24 to 48 hours before they get access to their instructional online materials, it's just absurd. And so I think coming from a school district viewpoint, right, being able to go into this database, very much like Dan said, look at the vendors, look at the people who are, dedicated to improving this ecosystem that we're rolling out into our schools, so that we can save that instructional time, so that we can, put administrators and teachers back where they need to be. And that is focusing on kids' needs. They don't need to be focused on moving CSV files and downloading data and that. They need to be analyzing the data and taking the data and applying it so that our kids are growing, right? And so when you take all that into context, why is Project Unicorn and why is the certification important? It shows that as a vendor, you value that. It shows that you want to partner with those school districts and you want to truly help them be successful. And it's a place for district administrators to go and to see that and find that info.
Thanks. Dan, anything to add to that? How is this certification? I think you were getting into it a little bit before, but how is it useful for school districts?
Yeah, I think Josh nailed it in terms of, just demystifies the, am I going to have, sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. Am I going to have a miserable manual experience after purchase or not?
Thanks. And Paul, anything to add, or we can move on?
They said it pretty well. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd say is, I think Project Unicorn stands out. Like rather than a district having to go out and maybe pay somebody to do this work for them, the fact that this is, free and something they can go and easily find, I think that's really important for a school district leader to be able to do that and useful.
Great.
That's all I have to add. It was said, answered well. Yep.
And I'm going to go to Dan for this question since Clever is the most recently certified. So how difficult was the Project Unicorn interoperability certification process?
Yeah, Chloe, I should have set a timer when I filled out the survey, but I'm certain it didn't take an hour, and I'm pretty sure if it was more than 30 minutes, it wasn't much. Actually, once you get certified, one of the things you have to do is set up your app in this EdSurge app database. And that actually took probably an hour, probably twice as long. But altogether, maybe an hour and a half spent. Now, it might be longer for some folks, right? You might come across areas where you say, oh, I'm not really proud of the answer that I have. I want to, do some more work to get this from a 1 to a 2 or a 2 to a 3. And you might be like, oh, we do this, but we don't have any documentation for that. So those would be the cases that might take a little bit longer. But I think from my perspective, it was time well spent to kind of validate the investments we've made and to make sure also that our documentation was really available and easy to share. So that was my experience.
Thanks. And Josh or Paul, anything to add from your experiences with the certification process? How difficult was it, or anything about the process itself?
Yeah, I would say the team does a really good job at Project Unicorn of walking the vendor through. If you have any questions, the resources are there. But, very much to what Dan said, it's really a good starting point to even evaluate where you are. So as you start that process, I would encourage you, don't come in with this mindset that you're just going to rush through and get the certification, but really take the time to just look at it and evaluate your practices, right? I think for us internally, it was a nice time to just have those conversations about access to data, what our plans were. I'll be honest, we didn't score, top tier in every single category when we went through it. And like you mentioned earlier, that's okay. It's a process, and we want to make sure that we're evolving. And that's something that our company is striving towards, but not a difficult process at all. Very open and transparent process. And very similar to Dan, an hour, half, 2 hours tops to pull all the materials together and go through it.
Great. And Paul, anything to add from formative experience?
Yeah, no, I wasn't directly involved in the certification, but I was told that it was about an hour to 2, same thing, and the same process of, being able to have a sense of pride that you met some of these things and some of those things that, we're working towards. It's nice to know, where we're at as a company.
Perfect. Yeah. And before I go to the next question, I'm going to just talk a little bit more about the process on the Project Unicorn end. So once we receive your application and we go through it, we're just validating what you have already noted in the application. So we're checking over the scores. We're making sure that you provided evidence. And again, that evidence, this is where, times can vary. Sometimes that means having a meeting with us and showing us the evidence, or sometimes that is just something on your public website. So that's where the times can vary. But once we validate the score, we will let you know of the score, and we will ask you again, part of that feedback loop, if it is okay to share this score with Digital Promise, who is the people that will send you the badge. So the Digital Promise the badge comes from Digital Promise. And then we will also share the information with ISTE/EdSurge for the product index, as well as Learn Platform. And just as Dan was describing, you will have to set up an account for the ULT ID for the EdSurge product index. And actually next week, or not next week, in 2 weeks, the next webinar, we will be talking a little bit more about that process and that product index. But that is exactly the process on our end. And that's all that you have to do. All right, we're going to go to the next panel question before we take a couple questions in the Q&A. So I'll start with Paul. So Paul, why do you and your company Formative prioritize interoperability just in general?
Yeah, I think it was said, like, I think that we've answered this question in a few times, but I think that there's it all comes down to the student outcomes, right? And the teacher's ability to be able to help the students. Because when we're saving districts time, when we're saving them the pain and hassle of having to deal with data that doesn't match or specs that don't match when they're using different tools, that's causing strife in their work, which ultimately impacts the teacher, which ultimately impacts the students. And so really it comes down to, the three main things that we serve in edtech is, improving teachers' access to a tool that can improve student outcomes, and then the student experience, right? Them being able to have a tool that serves their needs, allows teachers to make decisions that impact them positively in the future. And really, I think that interoperability is just key to the future of our industry. We're just going to have more and more tools that come out. And so these specs and standards, they need to, get better and better as we accommodate more functionality and features. But yeah, that was our big idea. It always comes down to the students and the teachers, right?
Anything to add, Dan or Josh?
Yeah, I think I've talked about some of the reasons here before, but one that I haven't mentioned, I think every company in edtech, Josh, Paul, tell me if you disagree, has a shared mission of helping students learn and succeed, right? And we have that shared mission, but if we don't make our products interoperable, we're not able to have our products work in unison to achieve that shared mission. So I think interoperability is so important so that schools can, work with many vendors and have it work in a harmonious way rather than an overwhelming and burdensome way.
Yeah, and I agree with Dan completely there. Our system shouldn't be a barrier, right? The tech world is to build the bridges, not to bring barriers to the table. And, even while some products compete with one another, right? At the end of the day, what we want to do is work to ensure that each student and each teacher has the tools that they need to complete the mission of, educating kids. And so right on and agree with Dan there. It's,
Great. And we're getting to our last panel question. So this question is pretty open. So the question is, where should you start? And, this can be related to maybe any of your experiences of how you came across the Project Unicorn interoperability certification, or, it could be more about where should you start on your interoperability journey if it's a company that's in the beginning of that. So any of you that want to start with that question?
Can I throw something really controversial out here, and Josh and Paul can maybe prove me wrong? But I do believe that there's such a thing as being too early when it comes to interoperability. One of the greatest pieces of startup advice that Clever ever got was do things that don't scale. So to be early in the earliest days, like before your product is even fully done, go put it in front of some teachers. Go, try to get a classroom to use it. And I think at that stage, interoperability should not be your focus. You need to nail your core user experience. You need to make sure that there's something worth it for folks to use and adopt. I'll say this sometimes to folks who come to Clever and want to become customers, you're too early. You're not doing district contracts yet. I think that that's the moment. There's some things that maybe there's some early interoperability things that might make sense, like doing single sign-on so that you don't have to worry about usernames and passwords. That can be a great one. But I think for me, the key is when you get to the point where you're selling to districts, that's when you need to be a 4 on the Project Unicorn rubric. And until then, maybe that's not the most important thing for you to focus. Please disagree with me.
Yeah, I was going to say the only thing I would disagree with Dan on there would be just keep interoperability in your mind as you're making some of those decisions, those early parts. One of the things that I think about that I dealt with directly is right, the number of companies who would use an email address as a primary identifier. Well, we have kids who change genders. We have kids who are adopted. We have kids who go through lots of situations, and email addresses change. And so even something as little as using, an internal primary ID that's a number that you're getting, or using the SysID, can help you so far down the road when it comes to how your product is built. And so I would say I agree with Dan. Like, you have to focus on your core mission and what you're going to bring. But as you're looking at that, just try to think 2 or 3 steps ahead about, how are decisions we're making today, how can we ensure interoperability down the road as we're working through that. But definitely, I would say the Project Unicorn rubric is a great place to just start having conversations, because it builds a good foundation. Yeah, you might not need API access into your database immediately as a startup when you're not doing those district contracts, but you can at least start thinking, like, when we get there, what could it look like?
Yeah, well said. I agree. I think that rubric is a good, guiding goals, right? Like, where you maybe want to get to, but even if you're not ready, I think that it's a good thing to just take a look, see where you're at, and then maybe even set goals to get there. And it will help in the end to do things early, rather than having to rewrite things.
All right, so we have a couple minutes for a few questions. And again, please feel free to put them into the chat right now if you have any questions for our panelists or any questions about the certification in general. We did have one question come in that says, any information you can share on Project Unicorn's reach, reputation amongst school IT administrators? And Susan answer this, and I'll read the answer out loud, but also Josh, Dan, Paul, if you want to chime in at all about your experiences or anything to do with, Project Unicorn and the resources that can be helpful there. So from our side, from what Susan said, we have over 750 districts that have signed the Project Unicorn School Network Pledge. And, this is something that when we have a list of certified vendors, we notify all of our network pledge signatories. So that's one thing just to note. They're in the loop with all the different resources and all the things that Project Unicorn is creating and pushing out. And then also Project Unicorn, as we noted before, is a coalition made up of other organizations. So COSIN is one of the members of the Project Unicorn Steering Committee. And Susan said that we work closely with them on supporting the needs of K-12 IT administrators. And also we're presenting at the COSIN conference and have also collaborated on webinars. And then also several of our steering committee partners, including CC, SSO, and CETA, work with states on interoperability initiatives as well. And thanks for typing that out, Susan. That was a great answer. Anything to add, Josh, Dan, or Paul, about your experiences with Project Unicorn?
Yeah, I would just say that the districts that are really engaged with Project Unicorn, they influence a lot of districts. They're the ones who are tech leaders, who are presenting at conferences, that kind of a thing. So their reach, I think, is bigger even than those great numbers that Chloe and Susan shared.
Yeah, and I would just say, from a marketing standpoint, like, Project Unicorn's out there, right? People know what it is, and they are really putting interoperability with that, especially when you're looking at, very much like Dan said, the district leaders who are involved in the COSINs, who are involved with, one edtech and these industry standards. Like, Project Unicorn is there. And I think the certification definitely brings a lot of value into the community and will continue to grow.
Awesome. All right. So we got another question. There was one question in the chat about registration for the next webinar, and we're going to put that up in just a moment. So hang on for that one. And then we got another question. How do we get started with the certification process? We will chat in again the link, and it just says apply here. You can follow those directions. The other option is to, in a moment, I'll actually share my screen. The first step in actually applying for the certification is to sign the vendor pledge. So the QR code is there, or we will chat in the link. And this is a pledge, or this is something that you're signing before you do the vendor certification. And this is just showing your commitment to making your products interoperable. Also, when you sign the vendor pledge, you can set up a meeting immediately with the Project Unicorn team, which is me and Susan, and we will guide you on any next steps in maybe your interoperability journey, or tell you that it might be a great time for you to apply for the certification if you're ready. And again, even if you're not ready to pursue the certification, you can still sign the pledge, and with the pledge being a signatory, you will be the first to be notified of any new resources that we create. You're also joining a community of like-minded edtech vendors and school systems. You have access to an online community. You have those one-to-one technical assistance calls and referrals. And there's also opportunities for scholarships, for conferences, professional learning, and different things to improve human capacity for interoperability. And again, you'll be the first to learn about our new resources. So to just end our session today, a couple things to note. We have a resource library, and that is on our Project Unicorn site. You can search the keyword of vendor to see any resources that were made specifically for vendors. And these are documents that we make along with our steering committee, as well as our technical advisory committee, which is made up of a bunch of vendors in the market who are trying to come together to advance interoperability. We have a YouTube channel where we post all of our webinars like this one. You can check out our Interoperability 101 for vendors from our previous webinar. And just as we promised, we are going to have a part 2 to this series on the 31st of January. It's a Tuesday, and that will be at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. This will feature the ISTE/EdSurge product index, as well as the Learn platform. And we will also have another vendor from Branching Minds there to talk about the perspective from the vendor of being on those two platforms. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're very grateful that you joined us, and we thank our speakers for being on the panel today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.